The sky bleeds orange and crimson over a desolate high desert plateau at dawn. Red stone formations rise like ancient sentinels against the horizon. A small tent cabin sits alone in the vastness, dwarfed by the endless expanse of scrub brush and parched earth. Sarah, a woman in her late 30s with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, kneels beside a fresh grave. A crude wooden cross marks the mound of rocky soil. She pats down the last of the earth with her bare hands, her movements methodical and mechanical, her face carved from the same stone as the desert itself. She stands slowly, wiping dust on her worn canvas pants. There are no tears. Her eyes are as dry as the cracked earth beneath her boots. She reaches down and touches the cross. Rough pine, hastily carved. Her fingers trace the name carved into the wood, Jesse. She whispers a hoarse goodbye to her husband, explaining that she cannot stay. The wind picks up, carrying her words away into nothing. She looks toward the horizon. A dark wall rises in the distance, churning, massive, swallowing the sky like a living thing. The wind begins to moan, low and ominous. It's a black roller, a massive dust storm. Her jaw tightens. She takes one last look at the grave, committing it to memory, then turns and walks quickly toward the cabin. Sarah emerges from the cabin carrying a worn saddlebag and a canteen that sloshes half empty. She's wearing Jesse's leather duster, far too big for her, with sleeves that extend past her wrists and shoulders that hang loose like a child wearing her father's coat. She pauses on the porch, one hand on the door frame. Inside, their bed remains unmade. His hat still hangs on the peg. The coffee pot they shared every morning for 3 years sits on the stove. She forces herself to turn away. Her mare, a dusty brown Mustang, stamps nervously at the hitching post. Sarah approaches slowly, murmuring soft words of comfort. She strokes the animal's neck, feeling its racing heart beneath the hide. She tells the mare that she knows they're both scared, but they must leave now. She cinches the saddle tight, checks the straps twice, then a third time. Her hands shake slightly, but she steadies them through force of will. The wind is picking up, whipping her hair across her face. Dust devils dance in the distance. She casts one last look at the porch, at the grave barely visible now, at the life she's leaving behind. She whispers a final goodbye to Jesse, telling him she loved him and still does. She mounts the horse and the leather creaks beneath her weight. She kicks the mare into a trot, heading toward the distant canyon pass. Behind her, the cabin door bangs open and closed in the rising wind. Open, closed, open, closed. She doesn't look back. By midday, the world has turned red. Dust fills the air like a living thing, howling, blinding, suffocating everything in its path. Sarah rides with one arm shielding her face, squinting through the maelstrom. The mare struggles forward with her head down, fighting the wind with every step. Visibility drops to mere feet. The trail has vanished completely. Sarah navigates by instinct and prayer, alone. She shouts encouragement to her horse over the screaming wind, urging her to keep going just a few more miles. Thunder rumbles, low and threatening at first, then closer, much closer. A lightning bolt cracks the sky with deafening force, sudden and blinding white against the red dust, striking a rock formation no more than 30 yards away. The mare screams in terror and rears violently, her eyes rolling white with fear. Sarah grabs desperately for the reins, but her fingers close on empty air. She's thrown hard to the ground. The impact drives every bit of breath from her lungs in an audible gasp. Her head cracks against stone, and stars explode behind her eyes. Through the swirling dust, she sees the mare bolt into the red haze, vanishing within seconds like a ghost disappearing into fog. Sarah gasps for air, reaching out uselessly toward where the horse disappeared. She tries to stand, but white-hot pain shoots through her left ankle. She screams and collapses back down, rolling onto her side. Blood seeps from her temple, mixing with dust to form red mud on her face. She coughs violently as dust fills her mouth, her nose, her lungs. Each breath becomes agony. For a single moment, just one moment, she lies completely still. It would be so easy, she thinks. So easy to just stop fighting, to let the desert claim her. Then something hardens in her eyes. Jesse's face flashes through her mind. She rolls onto her stomach, speaking through gritted teeth. She tells herself she must crawl, that stopping means becoming part of the sand, that Jesse wouldn't want this, that he would want her to fight. She begins to drag herself forward on her elbows, inch by agonizing inch. Blood seeps through the torn knee of her pants. Her fingernails scrape against rock and sand, breaking and bleeding. 5 feet, 10 feet. Every movement is torture. But she continues. Through the swirling chaos ahead, a dark shape begins to emerge. A stone dugout built directly into the canyon wall, barely visible through the thick curtain of dust. It appears almost like a miracle, or perhaps a mirage. Sarah's eyes lock onto it with desperate focus. She crawls faster now, ignoring the screaming pain, ignoring everything in the world except that door ahead of her. Sarah reaches the heavy timber door and pounds on it with both fists, each strike weaker than the last. Her voice is hoarse as she begs for help, for someone to answer. But there's only silence, nothing but the shriek of wind and the hiss of sand against stone. She pounds again, harder this time, desperation completely overriding her pain. Her vision begins to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in. She pounds one more time, her voice barely audible now as she whispers a plea for help. Nothing responds. Her head drops against the door in defeat. Tears finally come, mixing with the blood and dust on her face. Then suddenly the door jerks open without warning. Sarah nearly falls forward into the opening. A massive figure fills the doorway, backlit by firelight from within. It's Cade, a man in his mid-40s, weathered as driftwood, with a beard streaked with gray and eyes like flint. He glares down at her, holding a rifle in one hand. He begins to growl a question about what business she has coming to his door at this hour, but then he truly sees her state. Collapsed, bleeding, covered in dust, barely conscious. Her eyes begin to roll back in her head. His expression doesn't soften, but his body moves into action. He sets the rifle aside quickly, reaches down, and grabs her by Jesse's duster. With surprising gentleness despite his rough manner, he drags her inside to safety. The door slams shut behind them, cutting off the wind's roar completely. The sudden quiet is almost painful, like diving deep underwater. The dugout is small and rough, but solidly built. The stone floor has been swept clean. Wooden beams overhead are blackened by years of smoke. An iron stove glows orange in the corner, casting dancing shadows across the walls. There's a single cot, a simple table, and a shelf stocked with provisions. Cade throws a rough wool hide over Sarah's shoulders and helps her sit against the wall near the warmth of the stove. He tells her bluntly that she's a fool for being out in such a storm. He moves to a basin, dips a tin cup into a water bucket, and brings it to her. She reaches for it with trembling hands. He pulls it back slightly, warning her to drink slowly or she'll make herself sick. She nods in understanding. He allows her to drink then. She sips at first, then gulps desperately, water running down her chin. She coughs and sputters. He reminds her pointedly of what he just said. Sarah looks up at him, finally catching her breath. Up close, his face is all hard angles and old scars, deeply carved by sun and wind. But his hands, rough as they are, remain surprisingly steady and sure. She thanks him in a hoarse voice. He tells her not to thank him yet. Without asking permission, he examines her injured ankle, pressing gently to assess the damage. She winces sharply at his touch. He announces that it's sprained, not broken, that she's lucky. He produces a strip of cloth and begins wrapping the ankle with practiced efficiency. Clearly experienced in such matters, Sarah asks if he's a doctor. He replies that he's simply a man who's lived alone for 6 years, that out here you learn to set bones or you die. It's that simple. He ties off the bandage securely, then examines the cut on her temple. He takes another cloth, dampens it in the basin, and wipes away the blood with surprisingly gentle touches for such rough hands. He tells her she'll live, but he makes it clear that she'll leave when the wind drops, that he has no room for guests and no desire for company. He turns away abruptly and begins stoking the fire. Sarah pulls the wool hide tighter around herself, her teeth still chattering despite the growing warmth in the room. Her eyes begin to wander, taking in her surroundings. The dugout is sparse, but it's not lifeless. Everything has its place, its purpose, its meaning. Then she sees them. On a wooden crate near the wall sits a silver hairbrush, tarnished but carefully placed as if it's something precious. Next to it rests a small carved wooden bird, delicate and perfectly crafted. And beside that, a child's corn husk doll, faded but lovingly preserved. Sarah stares at these objects. These are not the possessions of a hermit who wants to be alone. These are relics, sacred objects, shrines to a past life. Cade follows her gaze and sees what she's looking at. His jaw tightens visibly. He turns away sharply, his body language closing off. Sarah apologizes quietly, saying she didn't mean to pry into his private things. He cuts her off, his voice hard and defensive. He explains that the hairbrush belonged to his wife, that she died 6 summers ago, that the heat took her on a day not much different from this one, that the fever came on suddenly, and she was gone before he could get her to town for help. A long, heavy silence fills the space between them. The fire crackles and pops. Outside, the wind continues to howl like something alive and angry. His voice softens slightly, though reluctantly. He explains that the carved bird is something he made for his eldest daughter, Emma, that she's 10 years old now, or maybe 11. He's lost track of time. He sits heavily on a wooden stool, and suddenly he looks much older than his years. He continues his story. His daughters, Emma and little Rose. His wife's family came just 3 months after they buried her. They said he'd gone wild with grief, that he wasn't fit to raise young girls, that he was dangerous. His hands clench into tight fists at the memory. He tells Sarah that he fought them, fought hard, but they had the law on their side, and he had nothing but this stone hole in the ground and his burning anger, so they took his daughters away from him. Sarah's eyes glisten with unshed tears. She understands this kind of loss intimately, the kind that hollows you out completely and leaves you nothing but an empty shell. She speaks quietly, telling him that her husband died just 2 nights ago. Dust fever, she explains. It started with a simple cough. By morning he was burning up with fever. By nightfall he was gone. Her voice breaks on that last word, the grief still raw and bleeding. She continues, explaining that she buried him that very morning. Just her, alone, no preacher to say words over him, no proper ceremony, nothing but what prayers she could remember from childhood. Cade pauses in his work for just a moment, then continues preparing food, hardtack, strips of dried meat, and bitter coffee brewed strong. He says simply that then she knows. She nods, confirming that, yes, she knows. He describes what it's like to wake up each morning and forget, just for a single second, that they're gone, to reach across the bed for someone who's no longer there. She whispers that it happens every single morning. He continues, knowing what it's like to hear their voice when the wind blows in a certain way, carried on the air like a ghost. She confirms in a whisper that yes, she knows that too. She knows all of it. He hands her a tin plate with hardtack and a strip of jerky, along with a cup of bitter, steaming coffee. She takes it with both hands, holding it as if it's something precious. He tells her to eat, that she needs to build back her strength. They eat together in silence. It's not an awkward silence, but rather a heavy one. The silence shared by 2 people who understand loss far too well, who have both walked through fire and emerged scarred but still breathing. The storm continues to rage outside, but inside the small dugout, for the first time in many days, Sarah feels something approaching safety. Later that evening, the storm still rages outside, but it sounds muffled now, distant and less threatening. The stone dugout feels like a cave existing outside of normal time, a small pocket of warmth and quiet carved out of a hostile world. Cade sits by the fire, working carefully on something held in his large, weathered hands. Sarah watches him from her spot against the wall, the wool hide still wrapped around her shoulders. It's Jesse's leather duster. Cade oils it meticulously with a rag and a small tin of grease, working the leather methodically in small circles to keep it from cracking and becoming brittle in the harsh, dry air. His movements are practiced, almost meditative in their careful attention. Sarah tells him he doesn't have to do that it's not necessary. Without looking up from his work, Cade explains that leather cracks badly in this heat if you don't tend to it properly, that it becomes brittle and useless if neglected. He works in silence for another long moment. Then he speaks again, observing that a man who kept a coat this well-tended, who broke it in just right and maintained it so carefully, knew exactly what he was doing. That such a man was worth knowing. Sarah's throat tightens with emotion. She looks away quickly, blinking hard against the tears that threaten to fall. Her voice comes out thick when she speaks, confirming that yes, Jesse was good. He was patient and kind in a harsh world. She explains that he used to say, "The desert teaches you what truly matters in life. Not possessions or pride or status, just staying alive and, more importantly, staying human." Cade agrees simply that Jesse was a smart man. Sarah continues, explaining that her husband was a dreamer at heart, that he genuinely believed they could build something meaningful out here in this desolate place, a real ranch, maybe even a family someday, children to pass it on to. She laughs, but it's a bitter, hollow sound. She adds that the desert had other plans entirely. Cade responds with quiet certainty that the desert always does. It always has its own plans. He finishes working on the coat and hands it back to her carefully. Their fingers brush briefly as the coat changes hands, calloused touching calloused, one survivor's hands touching another's. Sarah takes it reverently, holds it close to her chest, and breathes in the familiar smell of oiled leather. She thanks him sincerely for this small kindness and for everything else he's done. He responds gruffly that he's not a kind man. She considers this, then replies that maybe he's not kind, but he's not cruel either, and sometimes that's enough. Cade looks at her then, really truly looks at her for the first time. He sees someone who has been broken by loss, but is somehow still standing upright, still breathing, still fighting. Someone just like himself. Sarah speaks quietly, almost to herself. She confesses that she doesn't know what she's supposed to do now, where she's supposed to go next, that the ranch is impossible. She can't go back there. Every single inch of that place is Jesse. Every corner holds his memory. Cade tells her plainly that she keeps breathing, that she puts one foot in front of the other day after day, that this is all any of them do, all any of them can do until they can't do it anymore. Sarah challenges this, gently saying, "That's not really living. That's just surviving, just existing." Cade meets her eyes directly and responds that sometimes surviving is enough. Sometimes, when the world is this hard, surviving is everything. The fire suddenly pops loudly, sending bright sparks spiraling upward. Outside, the wind finally begins to die down, the constant roar fading gradually to a murmur. Cade observes that the storm is breaking at last. Sarah nods in acknowledgement. Neither of them moves from their spots. Cade tells her she can stay until morning, until she gets her strength back. Sarah points out, with the ghost of humor in her voice, that she thought he had no room for guests, no desire for company. Cade allows himself the faintest ghost of a smile and clarifies that she's not a guest. She's a refugee. That's a different thing entirely. Later that night, in darkness, the fire has burned down to glowing embers, casting only the faintest orange light. Sarah lies on the single cot. Cade had insisted, taking the floor himself with only a thin bedroll. She stares up at the ceiling beams, unable to find sleep. In the darkness, she hears Cade's voice, quiet and vulnerable in a way it hasn't been before. He tells her he dreams about them, his girls, his daughters, that Emma was always singing, making up songs about birds and clouds, and whatever small thing caught her fancy. That Rose was the opposite, quiet and thoughtful, watching the world carefully as if trying to solve some great puzzle. A silence stretches between them in the dark. Then he admits, almost in a whisper, that he doesn't know if they remember him anymore. Sarah speaks into the darkness with certainty. She tells him that they remember, that children always remember their parents even when separated. He questions how she can sound so certain about this. She explains that she lost her own father when she was just 9 years old. He was thrown from a horse and died from his injuries, but she still remembers his voice clearly, even now, decades later, the way he smelled like tobacco and old leather, the way he used to call her his little bird. After a meaningful pause, she repeats with conviction that his daughters remember him. They haven't forgotten. A long, profound silence fills the dugout. Then, barely audible, Cade thanks her. Outside, the wind has stopped entirely now. The silence becomes profound, almost sacred. The next morning arrives with dawn breaking clear and golden. The storm has completely passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and new. The canyons are utterly silent, transformed by the storm, glowing in the soft, early light. The air smells fresh and pure, almost sweet. The heavy door opens. Cade leads Sarah's mare to the entrance. The horse is dusty but appears unharmed, and she's already been saddled and prepared for travel. Sarah steps outside, stunned to see her horse. She can't believe he found her mare. Cade explains that he found the animal at the draw, just before sunrise, that it took some patient coaxing to catch her, but that the mare is sound, just frightened by the storm. Sarah approaches slowly and runs her hand gently along the horse's neck. The mare nickers softly in recognition, pressing affectionately into Sarah's familiar touch. Sarah murmurs reassurances to the animal that they're both okay now, that they survived. She turns to face Cade and asks how she can possibly repay him for everything he's done. He responds firmly that she can't repay him, and that he doesn't want her to try. He crosses his arms, clearly uncomfortable with expressions of gratitude. He tells her there's work available at the mercantile down in the valley. Jenkins' place, he calls it. He describes Jenkins as a fair man. He instructs her to tell Jenkins that Cade sent her, that Jenkins will give her honest wages and a small room in the back to sleep in. It's not much, Cade admits, but it's honest work and a roof over her head. Sarah asks quietly if she'll see him again. If this is goodbye forever. Cade is silent for a long moment, looking out at the golden valley spread below them, at the infinite sky stretching overhead. Finally, he tells her that he comes down to the valley for supplies every first of the month, weather permitting, that there's a well in the town square right by the old cottonwood tree. He pauses significantly, then meets her eyes directly and tells her he'll look for her there, at the well, if she's there waiting. Sarah holds his gaze steadily. Something profound passes between them in that look. Not romance, not yet, but deep recognition. Understanding between two wounded souls. The fragile possibility of something more than mere survival. She tells him simply that she'll be there, that he can count on it. Neither of them smiles, but something fundamental has shifted between them, like a door that's been locked for years finally opening just a crack. Sarah mounts carefully, favoring her injured ankle. She settles into the familiar saddle and adjusts Jesse's duster around her shoulders, still his, but somehow beginning to feel like hers, too. She looks down at Cade one final time and thanks him, not just for the practical help, but for reminding her that she's still alive, that she's still capable of feeling something. Cade responds that she did that work herself, that he simply provided the fire to warm herself by, nothing more. Sarah turns the mare toward the golden valley below. The morning sun breaks fully over the canyon rim, flooding the entire world with clean, pure light. Cade watches her ride away, his hand raised in a small wave that she doesn't see. He watches intently until she becomes just a small silhouette against the rising sun, until she finally disappears around a distant bend in the trail. He stands there a moment longer, alone again. Then he turns back toward his dugout, his solitary home. But before closing the heavy door and sealing himself inside once more, he pauses, and then deliberately he leaves the door, standing open. Just a crack, just enough to let the morning light stream in. He looks at the silver hairbrush, the carved wooden bird, and the corn-husk doll, his shrine to the past. Then, slowly and carefully, he picks up the small doll and tucks it into his coat pocket, close to his heart. Keeping his daughter close, he speaks quietly to himself, to the empty air, to the memory of his children and his wife. He repeats the words like a promise, first of the month. He steps inside his dugout. The door closes softly, gently behind him, but not locked, not sealed. Still open to possibility. Meanwhile, Sarah rides steadily onward. The valley opens up gradually before her. She can see patches of green near a distant creek, and the small cluster of buildings that form the town in the distance. She reaches up and touches Jesse's duster with one hand, feeling the supple leather that Cade worked so carefully to preserve. Then she looks ahead toward her uncertain future instead of back at her painful past. For the first time in many long days since before Jesse died, she doesn't look back over her shoulder. She rides forward into whatever comes next. The story ends as it began, with a vast desert landscape, with survival against impossible odds, but now with the faint promise of hope carried on the morning wind. If you enjoyed this story, click the subscribe button, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.